Hello all. This bonus episode material is a bit different from what we've done in the past, in that I, Ariel, will be talking to a political candidate for the provincial Ontario election, which was called suddenly just a few weeks ago, and Ontarians will be going to the polls on February 27th. I'm here reiterating my disclaimer from last episode in case you didn't catch that one yet, and to be transparent about my thinking on the matter. As Solarpunks, we may differ in opinion on how best to bring about the bright green future that we would like, but for many, voting in democratic elections is a major tool in their Solarpunk toolkit. I would argue that for specifically the Canadian political system, it is a very strong tool that can help Solarpunks choose their allies and enemies in government, who they will eventually have to work with in order to effect meaningful change. Not to say that meaningful change cannot happen outside of governmental systems, but that in the 21st century, the hand we have been dealt is that direct democracy is one of the best ways to make a difference in laying the groundwork for a Solarpunk future. In meme speak, we live in a society, and some people are very good at manipulating that. It's a good idea to scale up. A lot of very politically active Canadians are watching this election with keen interest, and I'm of the opinion that this is an opportunity to push societal norms even just a little more towards policies that will lay the groundwork for a Solarpunk future. I do not mean this to be an endorsement for any political party in particular, but I do want to take the opportunity to insert Solarpunk talking points into the Canadian policy landscape. Okay, let's go. Hi listeners, welcome to a very special bonus episode of the Solarpunk Presents podcast. Today, I'm joined by Aislinn Clancy. Aislinn is the incumbent for the Kitchener Centre riding, having been elected in 2023 as the first ever Green member of provincial parliament in Kitchener Centre. In that time, she's put forward legislation to hold landlords accountable for rent evictions, which are a huge problem in our area. She's put forward legislation to enact vacancy control and affordable rental guidelines and investigate the overuse of illegal rent increases. She's also put forward 31 amendments and demanded accountability from the current provincial government on things like healthcare, fossil fuel company regulation, and she's pushed back on the privatization and underfunding of healthcare and education, which is also a huge issue in our province. So that includes pressures on our ER due to the lack of funding for addiction and mental health programs. She's also hosted a couple of town halls, one on housing to hear from those directly impacted, as well as one on education to hear directly from local educators and parents about mental health and behavioral challenges in schools, and on provincial bills meant to address these issues. So a huge issue our region deals with is being kind of neglected by the main provincial transit company. We have a train station, but we don't actually have GO train service on weekends, and the weekday service basically only runs during commuting hours. So she's teamed up with the federally elected Green MP for Kitchener Centre to advocate for better transit to and from the city. His name is Mike Morris, by the way. She is a former city councillor and school social worker, and she has 2 young children. So Aislinn, thank you so much for sitting down with me today.
Yeah, happy to join you.
So to start, I'd like us to begin at the beginnings. How you came to politics. Could you maybe start with what made you want to run for the Greens in the first place?
So I, was really involved in climate action. I was on a group called Citizen Climate Lobby, and we lobbied parliamentarians on climate action policy. I was also part of a group called Shift Action, and so it was lobbying my pension and other pensions to divest from fossil fuels. So pretty involved with that. And when Doug Ford was elected in 2018...
Doug Ford is the leader of the Conservative Party of Ontario and the current Premier of Ontario.
He ripped up 750 renewable energy contracts and tore down wind turbines. And he was making cuts to mental health programs and rape hotlines and things like that. Just seemed so backwards and foreign and unreasonable and uncaring. You fired the lawyer for children and youth who don't have parents. So lots of nasty stuff. So I was feeling pretty bleak and dark and down. And at that same time, Mike Morris was building his campaign in 2019. It was very early days. So I decided to kind of channel that rage into political action and really was quite involved in both his 2019 and 2020 elections. So it gave me the boost and the antidote for the kind of upset that I was feeling. And he won. And that was even more exciting because you felt like you were part of something big and part of real change. When Doug Ford won again in 2022, I kind of looked around and felt the need to do something more myself. And so that's when I decided to run for city council. And later when our MPP stepped down, it's really, campaigns are funny. There's like, you have to have good candidate skills. You have to have a good context, especially for Greens. It's hard for us to win without a good context and a good campaign. So I put my name forward to run provincially, knowing how much influence the province has on the municipalities. It was really hard for us to achieve a lot of our climate goals when the province was making the grid dirtier. We could electrify in the city, but if he's making the grid dirtier, it undermines a lot of those goals that we were working on. So that's kind of where it went to. It just like hoping my kids and everybody in Ontario has a place to live and a livable planet.
Right. I was going to ask you, why the Greens and not another party, but it's pretty obvious that you're very passionate about Green talking points. I was actually just wondering if you could briefly describe the Green Party of Ontario for our non-Canadian listeners, just because it's a little bit different, I think, than most other Green parties.
Yeah, what I like about Greens is that we don't whip our vote. So what does that mean? When I go to Queen's Park, I see that when there's a vote, the whole party votes in unison and they all stand up and clap for their leader, and it can be very leader centric. So we like to make ours more about the local community, and my job is to be they are my boss and I am to be their voice at Queen's Park instead of the other way around. And so we don't whip our vote. It's really my community that determines what are my priorities and what are the things that I speak about. Of course, we're very forward in getting oil and gas greed out of politics and out of our economy. We know that this is causing a lot of harm, increased inflation, corruption in politics, and really jeopardizing any chance of a livable future. So this is a core value of ours, but even our housing, we weave that into everything we do. So like generational change. Right now, our housing policy is all focused on young people and building within a countryside line. So adding density, adding units, helping people get a starter home, rental fairness, and opening up zoning. We've arbitrarily zoned a province to be single family dwelling and making it impossible for us to add more units in cities that are growing. So we want to open up zoning to include 4-story walk-ups and 6 to 11 stories on major roads in big cities.
That's awesome. And I'm going to put a pin in that because I'm going to ask you a little bit more about housing policy a little bit later. But first, in my emails with your campaign manager, I asked if you were familiar with Solarpunk, and I sent along an embarrassingly long couple of paragraphs that were kind of explaining what it was. Do you feel you have a bit of a better handle on it now, or?
I did read a Wikipedia page about Solarpunk, so
Okay, good.
it's great. I read a book called The Ministry of the Future. It's so important that we look at things, how we can break down some of those systems, colonial systems, capitalist systems that just don't work anymore. There's parts of capitalism maybe that work, but they don't work as they are functioning now. And it's not this or that, but it's all about, I like the idea of let's not do what Donald Trump is doing and be disruptive, but let's be disruptive in a way that's ensuring that we have a better future. And really with sustainability as the core value of making sure that disruption is with sustainability as a core tenet. I don't know if that's like...
Yeah, no, that's definitely part of it. I mean, a lot of the reason why Solarpunk is so popular is because people just have dystopia fatigue. Like, there was a spate in the 2010s when it was really popular for YA novels and like movies, basically all of our media to be like dystopia, dystopia, dystopia. And then real life started to kind of mirror that. And so everybody was like, wow, I want something that I can actually look forward to.
Yeah, the optimism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I feel that the Greens are one of the parties in Ontario that really embodies that. A lot of Solarpunk leaning folks. So
I think so.
Okay, I'm going to come back to the housing issue now because I'm intrigued by how the Ontario Greens have been advocating hard for like more and better housing, especially with the whole like legalized housing campaign. So can you tell our listeners a little bit more about what that means? Like
Yeah.
legalized housing?
For decades and decades and decades, we've had a way of building neighborhoods that has resulted in us having kind of unsustainable lifestyles. You know, people are stuck in really bad gridlock because it's been very car centric. We are sprawling into our farmland that feeds us, which is problematic, especially now with the tariffs, because we need farms to grow food that is local and we can have access to and not have to worry about food insecurity. So we know that other places in the world where they've built up and they've built around transit. I know that there's this like conspiracy theory about 15-minute cities.
Some people think that 15-minute cities are a plan by the government to make it so that people can only stay within a 15-minute radius of their home or they'll be punished or something. I haven't really looked into it because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Really, the idea is it's like an old school way of growing up where lots of people didn't have access to a car, but they didn't always need one. You know, don't it's not anti-car per se, but it's about anti-car as the only default. And it's about having housing available close to where you go to school, where you work, where you shop for your groceries, and where you go to the library. The suburbs are built in a way that you drive into your garage and you go into your back porch, and all your groceries have to be accessed by car. So we know that we can build added units, and this will help with affordability measures for folks trying to pay a mortgage, or it creates more affordable units where we already have infrastructure. Like sprawl development costs a municipality 2.5 times more than building within a countryside line where you already have those roads, you already have sidewalks and sewers under the ground, and that helps us bring more housing online faster. So not only is it good for your life because it can be a more affordable home closer to, you know, those communities where you live and grow, but it also is more sustainable because you don't always have to rely on cars. So it reduces gridlock. We can build around transit so people have options for how to get around. Yeah, so there's lots of reasons why adding a bit of density, like 70% of Ontario is zoned for single family dwelling. It's a massive barrier, and we always end up with tall and sprawl, you know, and there's only a certain number of developers that can build those things. And so we've left a whole whack of other housing builders out of it. So it's a policy that we put forward in the fall, and it was supported by the Chamber of Commerce, OREA.
OREA, or OERA, stands for Ontario Real Estate Association.
YIMBY, young people, like housing advocates. It was amazing the breadth of advocates that supported this. And the Ford government, because they're quite NIMBY, to be honest, and they don't want any change in the way, and they are in the pockets of developers, they kind of shoved it to the side, even though it had widespread support.
But hence legalize housing, like literally legalize it to be able to actually build more and better housing. I'm wondering about this new housing that's being developed. I know that that you guys don't have a whole lot of control over what developers decide, but also I'm wondering what your thoughts are on sort of making sure that the new buildings that are built are sustainable of design, sort of due to like climate catastrophes, even within, you know, the 4-story walk-ups or whatever, you know, they're properly insulated and have like proper air conditioning and stuff like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a really pro-grass government in charge. So I know with the building code, for example, the national building code was quite sustainably minded, and the province kind of harmonized it in 3 of the 4 categories, leaving out the energy sector for building new homes. So that means that they are prioritizing natural gas infrastructure for all new homes. We supported legislation to ensure that even new homes were built with just the electrical done for a charging infrastructure near the garage or near the driveway, so that people with an electric vehicle didn't have to rip up their basement to put in that. And the PC government voted it down. So I think they're really in the pocket of only a handful of developers and gas companies that are really creating barriers for us to move in a more sustainable direction. And it's harmful, right? Like we're building buildings that we're going to have to retrofit, right? And it's just a waste of time. It's a waste of money. And what lot of builders, the widespread group of builders, is they want consistency. So you see municipalities like Toronto and London and others kind of creating a step program where they are demanding green development standards, and every city's different now, and that creates a lot of havoc in the building sector, and they want consistency. They'd rather do it right the first time and just have consistency across the province. So by the province defaulting to gas, defaulting to a very, I'd say, regressive way of looking at how we build buildings in a way that's not helpful. I think they're creating a lot of havoc and actually costing a lot of people more money in the end, right? But they look at short-term kind of moral opinion based, like none of this is based in fact, right? None of this is based in data. And it's all about like the upfront sticker price for the developer, not for the consumer. So it's too bad to see a government make decisions that are more leaning toward the person who's going to make the most money off of it. But, we're optimistic. Like we work across party lines and we bring things forward. So we know, for example, that in urban centers, we want to make sure that there's lots of charging infrastructure. And I do think we're at this moment in time where it's leaning toward an understanding that EVs are a reality. I think this summer, there's going to be huge outroar because the Ford government ripped up chargers and really hasn't laid the groundwork to make sure that we have good charging infrastructure. So we're going to see a real political will and a needle push, right? And so we're seeing people do it anyway. And I think we need to just keep pushing the government to fall in line and follow where the puck is going, so to speak, and make sure that we can add, even just charging to multi-residential infrastructure that's there now, so that young people or people who live in apartments and urban centers, this is ideal for EVs, right? When you're doing short commutes. So how do we make that possible in cities like Toronto, which you'd think there'd be more uptick of EVs, but there actually isn't because its charging infrastructure needs to grow. Anyway, sorry, that's my little rant.
No, for sure. That's something that I hear a lot from people who have EVs. Just speaking about making things possible, one more question on the housing right now. So, what about communal housing, making room for sort of generations? Like the biggest issue for a lot of people who want to do something like that is often just getting a mortgage for an unconventional style of housing. So is that something that the Green Party is sort of looking into? Do you think you could help with that?
Yeah, 100%. We know that the red tape's ridiculous. Like, we know lots of people who have put in granny suites in the back and have tried to get a mortgage with friends, and the banks are meeting them with a lot of resistance and red tape. Insurance companies are gouging. It's costing, there's a lot of delays. So, this is a government said they want to lift red tape for housing, but which kind of housing? In our platform, we want to make sure that people can get mortgages together. We can lift the red tape to condoizing and adding on units, using modular homes, for example, and using shared architectural plans so that people aren't reinventing the wheel every time, that we can get some of those wartime type homes where they're smaller and we can reproduce them more easily across the cities and towns. There's a lot of persnickety rules in municipalities, like setbacks and the angle of the roof and stuff like that. So if we can get some prefab designs that suit, we can use them widespread across the province. And then we have lots of people who are manufacturing these kinds of homes, and they can be done really cheaply, really quickly. And that will help us scale up in a way that makes that dream of home ownership a possibility for lots of people. I just met a family and their parent is aging and they want to put in an ADU, an additional dwelling unit in the back. So when to hear about our plan to lift the red tape, they were grateful because it shouldn't cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to put in an ADU behind their house. And they want to make sure they can keep an eye on their aging parent. Their aging parent wants independence, but they don't want to mow the lawn or shovel the driveway. So we have to make sure that we're opening up a lot of possibilities for people to cooperate more on creating housing solutions for each other. And that's really present in the Green Party plan and what we'll be focused on advocacy-wise in this next seating of the legislature.
I'm so glad to hear that. That is definitely something that people is on people's minds in the region, I think, especially since ADUs or additional dwelling units have really been in the news just locally for the last couple of years. This all sounds amazing, and I'm wondering, where would you get the money for all of this? Because, retrofitting houses or sustainability measures and EV charging networks and all of that, it's very expensive. So I'm wondering what the Green Party plans to do to sort of raise money for this.
So a lot of this is a way of looking at accounting. I studied business, and too often when you're talking about climate action, you're talking about a capital expense, right? But we're not just flushing money down the toilet when we do these things. It's an investment, right? So we often, like if you think of an EV, it has a higher price when you buy it, but over the lifespan, it pays itself off and you're making money after 5 or 8 or 10 years, right? So same goes with housing retrofits and energy retrofits and even charging infrastructure. These are investments in our economy. Like right now, we're looking at, for example, a really insecure energy future because we ripped up those 750 renewable energy contracts. We don't have the grid capacity we need to electrify. So let's look at our citizens as partners in this. It's so much cheaper to conserve energy than to build a new gas plant.
Opening new gas and nuclear power plants is the current provincial plan to meet energy needs.
So, and a lot of that saves people money. So let's provide the capital. Well, if people are on a low income, let's look at grants because people don't have the money up front and, it could be a real burden, but they deserve to save money just like everybody else. So we're looking at things like free heat pumps for people below 100 grand for their household and then loans for heat pumps for people above 100 grand. We're looking at loans for retrofits. We're looking at loans for adding units in your basement. A lot of these loans can get paid off. If you add a unit in your basement, you can charge rent and then you can pay that off, right? Or we can provide some grants for incentives. So a lot of these programs, it's just a different way of looking at your finances. Let's invest in ourselves. Like the government has so much money in the bank.
So much, in fact, that every Ontario taxpayer just received a check for $200 before the election. I'm feeling a way about it.
And we're probably invested in a lot of businesses outside of Ontario, outside of Canada, and making other people rich with our savings and money. Let's loan the money to our own citizens to conserve energy, to invest in sustainable and renewable type technologies. Let's let citizens put solar panels on their roof and then sell that energy back to the grid. Let's let them charge their batteries overnight when we have excess energy and it's super cheap, and then sell that back to the grid during those peak periods in the summer where everybody has their air conditioning. We don't need to keep building gas plants. We need to loan our citizens the money so they can make their life more affordable. We can conserve energy and we can generate energy and share energy in a way that's really creative and helpful.
For sure. It sounds like this is sort of a more long-term thinking about finances and long-term thinking on a generational time scale that allows for these savings to take effect.
Yeah, and I mean, it's things people want to do anyway, so it helps them live out their values. Like, I want to make my life, my home more more comfortable and seal it up and burn less gas. So let's just get rid of some of the red tape and the strings that keep people from investing in a way they want to invest and being part of a sustainable future like they want to. And it has a good economic benefit.
Speaking of economic benefits, the region of Waterloo is known as the Silicon Valley of Canada, and although it's obviously nowhere near the scale of the real Silicon Valley, I was kind of wondering about your thoughts on technology and like the workers in technology. Specifically, so making sure that the technology aligns with climate goals, it's clean, it doesn't rely on like energy sucking AI, etc., and that workers have, rights. And I think a lot of technology companies, we sort of overlook the need for unions among workers there. And the Green Party obviously supports workers. I've seen that in your previous sort of work in Parliament. But I'm wondering about the technology workers in the region of Waterloo.
Yeah, I do talk with my partner. Had a couple tech startups. He's a tech worker, so I see this pro and con of we have lots of neat ideas and startups and innovation. I think we have to be mindful of capitalizing on that here in Canada. Too often we have startups and then they got bought up by the states or they just sell to the states. So I think we need to make sure we have a good ecosystem for our tech sector. I mean, when it comes to sustainability, the current government has kind of directed a lot of attention to the health sciences. I'd like to see them also recognize the $2 trillion green tech sector. We could be making that a priority. I mean, this is the way the economy is going globally. And so let's make sure that we have so many smart people, so many innovators. How do we encourage that and make sure that they have possibilities all along the way to grow their business and actually sell what they innovate here in Canada. Too often they can't sell in Canada because of our procurement and so on. We have policies that make it easier to organize. Oftentimes, when people want to start a union, there's massive red tape and delays, and it can take a really, really long time. So we believed in lowering that barrier, getting rid of some of the things that are in the way to helping anyone organize, no matter what the sector, because people need a work-life balance. Whether you're a doctor or an education worker or a tech sector worker, your working conditions really matter. And we have to make sure that we're being sensitive and mindful of that, because people aren't, like they were in the past where they're going to work for the company for 30 years. They can get their PIN. People are very transient and mobile. And so if we don't ensure that we have a good environment, whether that's, being mindful of childcare opportunities, making sure that people have good health benefits, like we want to treat mental health like health, but we know that people need, more access to good benefits nowadays. So yeah, and just that equity piece, too often we see CEOs making, I think it's hundreds of times what the frontline worker makes these days. We want to rebalance that a bit with the way we look at taxes, to make sure that those lower wage workers are not being so abandoned and left behind. So there's a few ways we want to reorient our economy to be sure that nobody's left behind. I don't know if that kind of answers your question. I kind of went on a meandering.
But it does. I'm glad to hear that all of these things are kind of on your radar. As someone who's going to be representing people in the region of Waterloo. I mean, yeah, especially the whole people don't work for the same job for years. Often, like they'll switch after maybe a year. So it's good to hear that the Green Party is recognizing that reality.
Dealing with bad actors. Sometimes our labor laws really don't have a lot of teeth. So we have to make sure that we're not just policing homeless people. Let's talk about white collar crime. Let's talk about someone not getting paid their wages and, things like that.
Yeah, for sure. I want to take a moment to zoom out to the larger picture because while a lot of your plans involve improving Kitchener Center, we can't ignore the impact that U.S. policy will have on local businesses. You've talked about it a little bit already. So specifically the Trump tariffs. Could you speak on that a bit? How do you plan to help local Kitchener residents who are affected by these measures?
So there's a lot of ways in which we've weathered storms in the past. I mean, I studied business, and one of the main things that we were taught is diversify, right? And we've unfortunately, this government has prioritized foreign-owned companies often over our own businesses. We have the highest unemployment rate in Canada. But it's important to strike a balance. So we would be totally supportive with all provinces and our provincial government in getting rid of those provincial trade barriers. We've been asking for ages, especially with a lot of our local startup companies, to shift the way we look at procurement so that we support our own industries. I heard AstraZeneca was invented in Canada, yet it's the Danes that commercialized it, and it's actually a huge part of their GDP. There's so many examples locally of ways that we've created a lot of barriers to investing in these local companies. Our pensions and our wealthy elite, they're investing in housing and farmland, which makes people wanting to own farms and get into farming more challenging, and young people trying to buy homes make it more challenging for them because real estate investment trusts are buying up all the housing. You're competing with a hedge fund to get a home, or you're competing with a hedge fund if you want to start farming, which we have an aging farming population. So let's make it more challenging for speculators to buy farms and buy homes, and try to shift that back into our own sectors locally and in Canada and Ontario, so that we can buy our own products here. Like Stellantis wasn't selling EVs in Ontario because we're not encouraging the market here without the charging infrastructure, without some of the rebates. So let's get our government to nurture the very sectors that we have here in Canada so we can buy our own products. Let's use this opportunity I would love to see an investment in the green transition, right? This is an opportunity for us to improve our grid, to invest in renewables, to create a heat pump sector. And, look at some of the vulnerabilities we have, like in the COVID pandemic, we couldn't make our own vaccines, right? That made us super vulnerable when something happens. Let's invest in some of these sectors that we know we have the intellect here. We just need some of the infrastructure. Even our food gets shipped away because we don't have processing plants locally. We can do a lot of these things here in Ontario, but we need to be sure that We make that investment, those loans, that capital possible so that local industries can grow, they can shift their businesses. And where workers are affected, let's make sure that they're supported, they can access training, they can access some supports, and we can shift some of our industries and build more training partner relationships.
That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear you say that. And you talk a lot about sort of cross-party support, and I'm wondering sort of what's been your modus operandi or your MO to kind of get others on board with your goals, and if you're reelected, how do you plan to work across party lines and get everybody kind of on board with all these ideas that you guys have?
So I have coffee with anyone I can. Initially, I was having coffee with folks that I thought I would get along well with. And then I realized that was a large part of some of the MPPs. It was hard when you're just talking at each other and across the aisles. So I tried to have coffee with as many MPPs as I possibly could. So it's important that we try to find some common ground and some common values. So we do make an effort to try to align. So, when it comes to EVs or it comes to building codes or it comes to housing, we work hard to build those relationships with all the MPPs and all the parties so we can collaborate and get more done that benefits Ontarians. So that has been my effort, is trying to build those bridges. Of course, we're critical of the government when they're doing something that causes harm, but I also do say thank you. They've made some good investments in transit, for example, and I want to recognize when the government is doing something that I think is a net benefit, and I want to give them some kudos. So we try to strike a balance, and we also try to make sure that we can hustle for our community. So if Kitchener needs something, I've built those relationships so I can walk across the aisle. I can keep conversations going to ensure that, our not-for-profits are funded, our hospitals get built, and we have that investment locally. But it really helps to build that solidarity if we can, sit down and have a conversation that's respectful. So we really try to keep that tone when we go to the legislature. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'm hearing that, like relationships are really important, and it's really important to recognize that, if you have a shared goal or shared values, it doesn't really matter which party you are representing so much as getting that thing done for the benefit of Kitchener Center and the benefit of Ontarians. Is that sort of what I'm hearing from you?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I do think the Ford government has caused a lot of harm, but there's lots of good people over there. And I think there are lots of MPPs that want to do the right thing. So, for example, one of our MPPs put forward legislation to have curriculum in schools to help prevent people from sexual abuse, right? And as a school social worker, that's so important to me. I'm going to push for them to fund it. I'm going to push so that teachers have training on this, they get time away so they can learn how to do it, that it's done properly. But I'm supportive of that work. So, and so on with some of the work I've done, around, I got a bill passed with all 4-party support. And I think that's because I've built those relationships. I mean, partisan politics is part of the way things happen right now in the legislature, but we have to find ways to move beyond that as much as possible to make sure that we can get more done, find some alignment, and be productive. And that's how we move the needle, is leading with solutions. Like we've led with doubling OW and ODSP. We led with getting trucks onto the 407 and lots of different conversations.
ODSP stands for Ontario Disability Support Program, a benefit program for those unable to work due to disability that has been chronically underfunded for years now. The 407 is a toll route that can be used instead of the 401 highway. Many Ontarians would prefer that long-haul trucking companies use the 407 instead of clogging up the 401 with traffic.
But we have to pitch those ideas, and there's no monopoly on a good ideas.
Yeah, leading with the carrot instead of the stick. I know we're coming up on time, but really quickly, I was wondering if you have any advice that you would give to listeners who maybe want to get into their own local politics, or who just like to change the status quo of where they live generally. What advice would you give?
Yeah, I recommend Citizen Climate Lobby. That's kind of how I got my start. So meeting with your local MPP or MP, getting involved in a campaign. We have less than 2 weeks left. So it's a great opportunity to see what a campaign is all about. Ours is on the corner of Victoria and Park, and we're open every day. So you can come on by, get involved in writing op-eds. You can do stuff within your own organizations where you work, or your neighborhoods, or grassroots organizing. Look at what matters to you most and what is your sphere of influence you'd like to have, and then just try stuff out. It's amazing once you find your voice. it can go a long way to helping you feel empowered and taking steps to shift our society in the right direction.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Aislinn. So where can our listeners go to learn more about you as a candidate and about the Green Party of Ontario's platform?
I'll give you the website. I mean, come to Victoria Park and you can kind of sit down, have a coffee. People can canvass with me whenever they want. I'm going out multiple times a day, so you can be my arm buddy and we can walk from house to house together. Maybe not today. We might do apartment buildings today. It's a bit cold out there. But yeah, go to voteclancy.ca or you can go to gpo.ca and you can check out our socials. I think I'm Aislinn Clancy KC if you want to look and see what's going on that way. We put stuff out regularly so you can hear from us directly. And yeah, we're also grateful to hear from you. We're only as good as our connectedness with our community. So I really try to sit down with people and talk to them one-on-one as much as I can.
Was there anything else that you wanted to say in the interview?
Yeah, I just want to encourage people to get involved, right? Like this Ford government is so harmful. They mentioned climate change once in 200 pages of the fall economic statement. They are not here for the moment. They are using this tariff threat as a wave that they can ride. And so it's extremely harmful that we have a government that does not understand climate change, is not ready, and is not doing what they need to do to lead us through this. So please look at various websites on who you could support that could push back against this harmful conservative narrative that is going to lead us to a lot of harm in healthcare and education and definitely in climate action and readiness. So please get involved. Give of your time, treasure, or talent to campaigns across the province as soon as you can. Thank you.
And that's a wrap on this bonus interview with Aislinn Clancy, Green Party of Ontario incumbent for Kitchener Centre in the 2025 SNAP provincial election. Voting can be a tool that helps stack the cards in Solarpunk's favor. So get out there and exercise your democratic rights, and remember to stay Solarpunk.
Thank you for listening to Solarpunk Presents, a podcast hosted and produced by Ariel, Kroon, and Christina de la Rocha.
The audio for this episode was recorded in part on the traditional territory of the neutral Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples.
And in Germany. The opening and closing music for this podcast is Water Cooler Gang by Monkey Warhol, available for use under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License.
Don't forget to support us on Patreon at patreon.com/solarpunkpresents.
Every little bit helps us keep bringing you discussions and interviews.
Until the next episode, keep dreaming.
And stay Solarpunk.